Good morning. Wow, 9:30. It's great to be here with you. And I'm glad that you're here and I'm glad that you're awake. This is great. My name is Justin. I get to serve as the teaching pastor. And I'm really excited that you're here. And I know there's a bunch of you online as well. And so we're excited for you to be able to join us for this part of our series as well. So as we get started, we're at the tail end of this series, The King Revealed. And I want to start today with an observation that I've made about children in nearly, I say nearly, but 15 years of fatherhood. And this is maybe something you can relate to if you've ever been with kids before. Kids have interesting memories. Oh yeah, already. It's very selective, is it not? And the things that they remember. Just with my children, they seem to forget everything that I ask them to do. But they recall and cling to every promise I've ever made. Do you know this to be true? You're like, yeah, it's like when you're laughing, it's like, that's how I know you know. It's so selective. They forget everything I tell them to do, they forget, and every promise I've ever made, they cling to. Like the boys, go put your pants on. But you put their pants in their hands, go put these pants on. And then they turn around, they're like, where'd my pants go? They've lost it in turning around while they're putting it on. It doesn't make sense. My kids forget where they put the Fire Stick remote. They start a show and then it's like, just gone. Can't find it. No idea where it is. We look forever. Go set the table and they end up on the trampoline. Which I would say doesn't make sense because they're in completely different spots. One is in the house, the other is not in the house. Oh, kids, they're fun. It's so interesting because they're very selective in the things that they remember. Because they cling to every promise I've ever made. Like my boys have been really into wrestling lately. Like they just want to wrestle all the time, which I think is, side note, not part of this, it's really good to wrestle with your kids. It gives them self-confidence. There's actually data to back that up. Also, I win every time, so that's also fun. But they ask to wrestle all the time, and they remind me when I promise to wrestle with them. They're like, remember when you promised to wrestle with us? Remember, and it's so obscure. Remember, I woke you up in the middle of the night out of a dead sleep. It was 3 Thursdays ago. It was 2:52 a.m. I remember looking at the clock. And you said that if I go away right now and you don't have to see my face again, you will wrestle us on this date. And Dad, today is the day, And they'll pull that out. So it's completely selective. Anyways, kids are funny that way. And I'll say this, and maybe you can relate with as a parent or with kids or with nieces or nephews. I've unfortunately broken promises to my kids. And it creates disappointment. You've experienced the tears probably. And so there's a lot of reasons I break those promises. I meant well, but I can't deliver. I overestimate my abilities to do that. Or I forget what I said because it was made in the middle of the night while I was half awake. Or I didn't leave enough time with enough margin with my time or with my other resources. But at a high level, here's what I want to say. When I do that, the problem is me, not them. The problem is me, not them. And what's interesting about that thought process for a moment is, and interesting in life, what's weird, is that I think in life we can find ourselves disappointed with God, even though he has never broken a single promise. He's good on everything he said he would do. And yet we still find ourselves experiencing disappointment. And so the question is, how does that happen, or why does that happen in life? And so I want to take a crack at that to kind of explain. Here's why I think that happens. First, it starts with sin. Life is completely broken because of sin. And I put this windshield up, or this window, right? You kind of see it's broken in the middle, and then it's spider-webbed out. This is what sin does. It started at the very beginning of the story with Adam and Eve, that first sin, and now it infects everything. It's a disease. It corrupts. It distorts. It breaks up everything. And you and I, we live on the other side of the splinters. So everything, it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Nothing happens the way that it should. Not according to God's plan. So life is completely broken, but what that means is that things in life happen. Crises emerge. And life doesn't go the way that we expect it to or we think it should go a lot. And that creates disappointment. At a high level, this is what I think disappointment is. This is what I think all disappointment is. It's the gap between reality and expectations. Or between experience and expectations, the reality of your experience. It's just the gap, right? Between what we're really experiencing and what we expected to experience. But the problem is, or a huge problem is, in the gap, everybody experiences the gap at some point in life. And we're tempted to forget how he feels about us. We're tempted to conclude he doesn't care about us, he's not thinking about us, he doesn't love us. We begin to doubt how he feels about us. And then we become tempted to deconstruct our faith on our own, because if we're going to experience disappointment, I got to figure my own way out. And so here, we talk about this kind of stuff a fair amount because I think it's really prevalent. But today, what I want to do, I'm excited that you're here. I want to encourage you. That's what I want to do. Because the realities of life are coming. You're either in them or you're going towards them, or you're in them right now. Crisis is coming at you. It's not a matter of if it will happen, it's when it will happen. So what I want to encourage us with is to remember today 3 unbreakable promises made by the King of all kings. And that's what we're going to talk about. You ready to jump in? Let's do this. So these promises, they're going to come during the last meal of Jesus' life on earth. This is a scene called the Last Supper or the Lord's Supper, if you've thought about that or heard those phrases before. And so what I want to do is I want to kind of set the scene, and then we'll unpack those promises as we go in just a little bit. So like for set up the context, we're going to pick up where Graham more or less left us off last week. Pastor Graham did in that message. So here's what Matthew 26:19 says, and you can follow along up here, or if you've got YouVersion, do that. Your Bibles are great as well, if you've got those. The disciples, they did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. This is huge to what we're talking about today, the Passover. Just hold on to that. It's a very symbolic Jewish feast, and we'll get into that a little bit more as we go. Okay, but just hold it for now, because I want to set the context, right? So this is the night, this Last Supper is the night before Jesus is going to the cross. And he knows he's going to the cross. His disciples don't understand, but he knows they are going to have their hopes dashed to bits. They're going to spiral with all the unmet expectations, and they're going to run away and hide. He knows that's coming. So that's why it's like, to me, it's really powerful that he makes these unbreakable promises the night before all that. At this point that we're talking about in the supper, this meal, Jesus had already washed the feet of the 12 disciples. Pastor Graham brought that in last week. And that included Judas Iscariot, who was the betrayer, the one who would hand him over for death. And so now they're all reclining at the table. And I'll put the picture Graham used last week, because this helps us think about it. If you've ever seen pictures, Da Vinci's rendering of the Last Supper, it makes it look like they're all around a table and also all white. There's that. But we also think about reclining at a table. We're all sitting at a table, but you see the cushions, they're kind of leaning in. You kind of have to lean back. They're pointing their feet away. Imagine this kind of moment. Okay, this is what the meal looks like. And Jesus, in the middle of this meal, he says that there's one at the table who will betray him. And everyone is alarmed. And when Jesus says something shocking like this, you can imagine all of the eyes in the room are fixed on Jesus to hear more about this. However, Peter, who I think is on the other side of the table from Jesus, motions to John, for the Apostle John, who's sitting close to Jesus, to ask him some questions and find out who is going to betray him. Because it's betrayers at the table. Who is it? Okay? So Peter makes a motion to John. John asks the question because he's close. He can lean back on Jesus and ask the question. And so Jesus shares what I think is an earshot of the Apostle John only. And nobody else can hear this because they're close in proximity. And here's what Jesus says. He says, "It is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. The interesting thing is, while the Apostle John may be looped in, not everybody else is looped in. because for Jesus to be able to hand it to Judas, that means Judas is pretty close. So for Judas to be sitting close to Jesus, it's a seat of honor. So to everyone else at the table, it looks like Judas is sitting in a seat of honor by Jesus, getting food from the master himself. It's like double honor. Meanwhile, Jesus has just called him out as the betrayer. Do you see the irony there? I also want you to see, do you see the mercy of Jesus there? He's loving. He, in all of that, doesn't treat Judas any differently or hold him at arm's length. You see the love of God. So then Judas, after he had taken the morsel, it says Satan entered into him. And Jesus said to him, what you are going to do quickly. You may get hung up. What does it mean, Satan entered? Well, I think it's demonic activity of some kind. I don't exactly know. Demonic influence, possession, oppression, some level. But I want to be clear, it never happens without an invitation. And Judas had already made an invitation. He had gone to the religious leaders and he had said, how much money will you give me if I hand Jesus over to you? And they agreed on 30 shekels of silver. He'd already made the invitation. And then this happens. So Judas leaves at that moment to betray Jesus. He leaves the 11 behind and essentially seals Jesus' fate. And the clock is ticking. And now, with just the 11 present, the king makes some incredible promises. Here's what he says. In Luke 22, we're going to look at Luke and Matthew's accounts of this. When the hour came, he reclined at table, and the apostles with him, and he said to them, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Okay, so let's talk about the Passover, because now it's coming up again. Here it is. So the Passover, this is a feast they would take, and it's representative of the 10th and final plague when God led the nation of Israel out of slavery in Egypt in the Old Testament. If you've seen the movies, right? If you've seen the movies, read the stories, heard of Moses before, this is that moment, and he led them out with 10 plagues. Now, the 10th and final plague was the death of the firstborn. And so what they would have to do is they would take a lamb and they would kill it and they would put the blood over the doorposts of the house. And that lamb was the substitute. And when the angel of judgment came in that 10th plague, he would pass over all the houses with the blood on the outside. And in remembrance of that, God instituted this Passover meal, and for over 1,000 years, they've been eating it. For generations, these Jewish families had celebrated it. So to me, it's really interesting that this Last Supper, the Lord's Supper, Jesus connects what we're about to talk about with that moment, and he does it very deliberately, and he doesn't have to, but he chooses to. That's significant. The other thing about Passover that you should know, and I didn't know this, I had to look into this stuff. There's a Passover presider. So there's someone at the feast that when you eat this, you don't just eat it, you story tell it as you're doing it. And there's a presider, someone who keeps the evening moving. And Jesus is that presider explaining the elements. He's the honored leader. It makes sense. And so one of the big elements of this meal was unleavened bread. It had no yeast, no rising agent. And it's because when they left Egypt, they had to leave in such haste they couldn't rise the bread. And so it was symbolic of their suffering, of having to leave and go into the wilderness without anything. Affliction. And so the normal line that you would say as the presider of the Passover was something like this. This is the bread of affliction which our fathers ate in the wilderness. This is the bread of affliction which our fathers ate in the wilderness. This is the bread of affliction which our fathers ate in the wilderness. You would say that, and then you would break it. And now what Jesus does, this is why it's incredible. Here's what Jesus says. Jesus, as they were eating, took bread, and after blessing it, broke it, and gave it to the disciples, and said this, take, eat, this is my body. He broke with 1,000 years of what people have been saying. Do you know how profound that is? Rather than repeat a normal line, he replaces it with a new promise and meaning. In other words, here's what's going on. What the nation of Israel had eaten for centuries as a reminder of the affliction they suffered so they could have freedom, Jesus is pointing to himself as the one who will bear the suffering and affliction so there can be freedom. But it's not political and it's not physical. We're talking about sin and the consequences of sin, which is death. The wages of sin, what it pays out is death. Our sin means death. It just always has and it always will. We deserve the penalty, the affliction. But Jesus says, this is my body. He's going to take the spot. He's going to stand in the gap. So do you see what he's promising? Here's the first promise, and I want to encourage us to remember it. Remember it. Remember, he promised a substitute. Remember, he promised a substitute. And then we were talking about this as a teaching team. Like, yeah, a substitute for what? For us. It's a substitute for us, him in our place. He became our payment for sin. The other thing that I love about this Last Supper moment is one of the three main things were like the cups of wine, the bread, and the lamb is never mentioned. Why? Because it's him. Didn't have to eat it, didn't have to take it. He was the one. He's the lamb, the substitute. He is the Lamb of God on the doorposts. So when he says what he says in this moment, he's foreshadowing the cross the next day, that he will bear the suffering required for sin in place of us. Now, we often talk about sacrifice, but this is the thing that as I'm like processing this, I want to also encourage you to think this way. Love requires sacrifice with substitution. Like substitution is really key. Love requires sacrifice with substitution. I'll say it this way. It's only love if you die for someone and it's the only way to save them. If you can save them another way, then you don't have to die. Substitution is huge. Think about like giving up your seat on a lifeboat, on a sinking ship. And there's a story, the Titanic. Perhaps you've heard of it, right? You've all heard of it. Seen the movie at least. Anyway, there's a story about a Scottish pastor named John Harper who was aboard the Titanic when it struck the iceberg. And he gave up his seat on the lifeboat. He went over to the lifeboat, made sure his 6-year-old daughter was on it safely situated, and then looked around and realized a lot of people were going to perish. And he knew a lot of them were going to perish far from God. So he gave up his seat, and he went back to witness to people and the time that remained. And then he just kind of helped rally. He said, women and children and the unsafe first. That's what he said. And he went over to the orchestra that was on board the Titanic and he encouraged them to play Near My Lord to Thee. And he prayed over people and with people. And then he went down with the ship and survived in the water as it went down. And while he was in the water, he had his life belt on, life preserver on. Notice someone didn't. He took it off and gave it to them and said, you need this more than me. And so he was clinging to debris and the wreckage, right, in the aftermath in the ocean. This freezing hypothermia setting in. And he's clinging to the debris. And he gets close to this guy and he asks him, he's like, do you believe in Jesus Christ? Are you saved? And the guy's like, I can't say that I am. And then a wave took him away, right? And somehow a wave brought him back and he said, have you made a decision yet? You know? It's true. It's true. Have you made a decision yet? And this guy at that point does. And the only reason we know is because John Harper eventually sank into the water and passed away without his life belt and freezing to death. But the guy that he told his story some years later, and he's like, I'm pretty sure I'm that guy's last convert. I'm talking about that substitution, sacrifice with substitution. And this is what Jesus did that only he could do. This is the promise. Now, I want to tell you these promises, but here's why we need them. We need them. Because circumstances in life happen all the time that make us doubt whether God loves us. Or we begin to question how he feels about us. There's a diagnosis that's terrifying. And it doesn't feel like it's deserved. There are children that we've raised, or they're living in our house and they reject us. Or they get older and they reject us. There are people that we love get sick. We get sick. There are loved ones who pass away earlier than we think they should, and we don't get to say goodbye. There's a betrayal in marriage that crumbles our whole world. Or some of us feel stuck in jobs that are sucking our soul away. And we look at anything, any crisis, any trial, any issue in life, and we tell ourselves it should not be this way. This is not what I expected. And that's why when those moments hit, come back to what you know. Remember, he promised a substitute. And no matter the circumstances, you can be confident at your core that he loves you because he already went to the cross in your place. Hold on to it. It leaks away. Hold on to it. Recall it, cling to it. And then Jesus makes another incredible promise. Promise 2. Remember, he promised a new covenant. And I know I just threw that word up there, so it's immediately a very churchy word. I gotcha. What is that? What's a covenant? And if there's a new one, that also means there's an old one. So that's got to be something we talk about, right? So here's what a covenant is at a high level. It's an agreement. It's an agreement between two parties. It's a treaty that signifies relationship and the boundaries of that. That's what it is. That's what a covenant is. So the old covenant in the Old Testament, here's what that looked like. The Old Testament, God made a covenant with his people, and the thing I want you to understand is every single time he made an agreement and built that relationship with people, there was always sacrifice involved. There was always sacrifice involved. So back at the beginning, near the beginning of the Old Testament, you've got this guy, Abraham. And God makes an agreement with him, a covenant, a treaty, and says that he's going to make him into a nation, a huge nation. And there's a sacrifice at that moment, and you can go to Genesis and find this. And you don't have to remember this, but a heifer, a goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a pigeon. A lot of animals, right? Then later on, there's that covenant between God and the nation of Israel, and this is with Moses. Moses helps with this on Mount Sinai, and this is where God gives the boundaries, the law, the Old Testament law, the 10 Commandments. This is the Old Covenant. And the 12 tribes of Israel, they sacrifice oxen. So I just want you to see, it's an old way of it's the old relationship. And then what Israel would do is every single year, they would, according to the law, they would sacrifice those sacrifices. And they would restore the relationship with God. They would acknowledge sin, restore the relationship with God. This was the Old Covenant. And they did that for over 1,000 years, for a long time. Because, and this is key, the writer of Hebrews says, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. And this is why. Because the wages of sin are death. Just where there is sin, wherever you and I miss the mark, we fall short of God's perfect standard in what we think, feel, or do. It just leads to death. It pays out death. And without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness for that. But the writer of Hebrews, and this is what I think is really powerful, he looks at the old covenant, the writer does, and basically says that it points to Jesus. They're a dim preview of the good and better things to come. The old covenant could not save. And I want you to see in Hebrews 11, look at this. Every priest, Jesus came to bring something new. Every priest stands daily at his service, offering repeatedly the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. They would sacrifice and it would just get pushed forward another year. Restore the relationship for another year. Restore the relationship for another year. But get what Jesus did. But when Christ had offered for all time a single sacrifice for sins, a substitute, he sat down at the right hand of God. Because it was done. And this is what Jesus points to in this Last Supper moment. What Jesus was about to say was profound because he's promising a new covenant better than the old covenant. He says, likewise, the cup after they had eaten, he took the cup after they had eaten and said, this cup is poured out, that is poured out for you, is the new covenant in my blood. So there's a new agreement, a new relationship. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink of it, all of you. And then he says, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I want to clarify, they're drinking wine, not blood. It's symbolic. But I throw this out there because at that time, that's what people thought they were doing, was drinking blood. They're not, okay? And the thing that's really interesting is this at Passover, and so I looked into this a little bit. They do 4 cups at Passover. Each one represents a different promise that God made in the Old Testament in Exodus chapter 6. And the time that Luke has Jesus taking this cup is in Promise 3, which is basically this, where God says, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. And so Jesus is basically effectively saying, this is a new relationship. Redeem, I'll buy you back with an outstretched arm. And I would say it was very outstretched on the cross, was it not? And this, for many, I love that for many, it's not just the 11 in the room, it's for anyone that would call on the name of the Lord. From generation to generation and poured out. It's a callback to the Passover. In the Passover story, they could not be saved unless they took shelter, literally, physically shelter in the blood of the Lamb. And then Jesus is pointing to this new way now, this new covenant now. It's the same. And I looked at this. They would take to get the blood on the door frame, right? They would use a hyssop branch. And a hyssop branch is what they used to put wine vinegar and give it to Jesus on the cross. So the symbolism is like, holy smokes, right? All the things that are connecting, that Jesus is connecting. So back to the second promise. This is what we have to hold on to. Remember, he promised a new covenant. So what's the new covenant? There's a new agreement between God and people, a new pact, a new relationship between God and man. Jesus is saying he's the substitute. The only way sin is forgiven is through him now. There's not a way to bypass it. There's not another way to get right with God. There just isn't. And I also love this covenant. It doesn't come with a laundry list of rules and expectations. It's him. It's only him. He finished the work on the cross. Receive it. Receive his blood. Receive his sacrifice. Receive his substitution. See, the Passover lamb saved life, but Jesus saves the soul. So why do we need this promise? Why do we need to remember it, I should say? Because life is so broken and marred by sin. It's a disease. And I think at points in life, we all feel the weight of our own sin. We all feel shame. We all feel guilty. Like we all feel broken for the mistakes that we made and the mistakes that we continue to make. And when crisis hits in life, it's even more challenging. We do even more things we regret. And I think one of the strategies that the devil employs, his most effective one, I think he lures us and draws us away from walking with God. And then when we're far enough away, he accuses us and says, now you can never go back. And in that time away, and maybe this is your story, in that time away, a lot of people make more mistakes and they do more things they think I can never come back from. But when we remember a promise like this, we realize, yes, you can. He wants a relationship with you. He died to make it possible. The late Pastor Tim Keller said, all other religions, the covenant is based on your commitment to a God. Christianity says your salvation is based on God's commitment to you. And it's good news. So, remember he promised a substitute. Remember, he promised a new covenant. And here's the third promise I want to share with you. Remember, he promised a future. He promised a future. This is the last thing Jesus says as they're having this Last Supper together. He says, I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. To me, that's a powerful statement. I'll drink it again with you, just not right now. I'll drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom in the next life. Which to me, how hopeful is this? In the same moment that he talks about being the bread of affliction and giving up his body and his blood on the cross, like the cross, though they don't quite understand that. And the same moment he does this and talk about his death, he also says, we'll have dinner together. How hopeful is that? He declares new life. To me, I hear this and it sure sounds like a standing dinner invitation. And the thing about this promise, it's not only for those 11 that are in the room, but it's for the forgiveness of sins for many. And earlier, Jesus had said this, I tell you this, that many Gentiles, that's non-Jewish people, will come from all over the world, from east and west, and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs of the nation of Israel and the Jewish faith, at the feast in the kingdom of heaven. That's incredible. He promised a future. Remember, he promised a future. And I'll ask you this, this is the question. So remember the promises, but why? Why do they matter? Here's why it matters. Because crisis, trial, and pain, they will hit. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when they will. And when that happens, hopelessness can settle in. A lot of times, because we enter a season and we wonder, how long will this season last? Or will this season ever end? Or will things ever go back to the way they used to be? And this is the challenge in so many things in life. A lot of times something happens and there's forever a new normal after it, where it doesn't go back to the way it was. And there can be grief in that. You can't go back to what was lost. But here's the hope and the joy. Hope and joy now come through remembering there is a promised better future. That this life isn't all there is. This life isn't all there is. It's just temporary. It's just a moment. It's just a blip. It's a vapor. And now one day the King of Kings will create a new heaven and a new earth. Pain are going to be gone. Disappointment will vanish. And then the King himself, it says in Revelation 21, will wipe every tear from their eyes. Come on. He's good. The King promised a future. And then the next day he died. But on the third day he crushed it. And that means, it just means that death has lost it loses its sting. It's lost its power. I mean, physical death's going to happen, but spiritual death doesn't have to happen at all. And the spiritual's much longer. It's infinite. It's eternal. You get to look at death like it's just going to sleep. You close your eyes here on this side of heaven and open them awake in the next, on the other side of heaven. And you think about that, it's like, when I think about death and like the afterlife, it's the most uncertain, it's the scariest, most uncertain, most anxiety-ridden thing. We just don't know what it'll be like. And Jesus has just taken away its power. That's a promise and a hope to cling to. And even that story I told you about John Harper, the guy on the Titanic, as he was going down, people that were around that eventually got rescued, he said, I can't hold on, I'm going down. And then they heard him, was like, but I'm going up. Because he had confidence. So let's bring it back. Let's wrap it up. Remember 3 unbreakable promises. And we'll put them up on the screen in a second, but you could look at these promises and say, but they're breakable. Like they're not unbreakable just because I said they're unbreakable. It's like, what makes them unbreakable? They're unbreakable because of the one who made them. Because the character of the God that made them, and his character and love was proven when he went to the cross. In the case of the first 2, he said, he promised to be a substitute, and he promised a new covenant. He did that on the cross. And when he promised the future, he already followed through on the first 2. He's good for the third. He's good for it. It's his character. That's what we're talking about. So here's my encouragement. When circumstances of life cause you to feel unloved and doubt God's affection for you, remember he promised a substitute. And when you feel ashamed and you're feeling lost and you feel worthless under the weight of your own sin and your own mistakes, remember he promised a new covenant. That there is nothing you can do to earn it, and there is no sin too big or too great that the blood of Jesus cannot cover it. And when you feel hopeless because of the pain or loss in life, remember he promised a future. There's life with him forever after this one. You got a seat at the table. You're set. Rest in that confidence. Remember that. So when we look at these promises here, I just want to say this. Maybe you're here, and because I know I've been talking about remembering, but you may be thinking, well, I can't remember something I never received. Because this is news to you, for some of you. So I want to say, receive it. Maybe you're here, you've never received it. Start there. You enter into this new covenant by faith in Jesus, When you receive Jesus, the blood of the Lamb of God becomes your substitute, and his blood is applied to the doorposts of your heart. And then you are guaranteed a new life and future with him forever. Step into that. Receive it. And maybe you're here and you've received these before. I'm sharing this, you're like, I've heard this before. I think we're called to remember it because Jesus knew it leaks. We forget day in, day out. These promises, they leak. We forget them. And to me, it's interesting. This moment that we remember in communion is the only time I can think of where Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. Keep coming back to this. We don't have to reenact a lot of stuff. We don't really have to reenact his birth. Some people do, right? But we don't have to every week. We don't reenact his miracles. But this moment, we come back to it because the promises leak. Let's remember them. Because when we remember, we begin to trust his unbreakable promises and live like they're true, regardless of how we feel, regardless of what we experience or what life has to throw at us. And when we take communion, which is what we're going to do right now. So if you didn't grab one of these, feel free to get it. We have open communion here. If you're a follower of Jesus, this is for you. When we take communion and take his body and the blood, the bread and the juice, we are declaring our trust in him, his character, and his unbreakable promises. Let's pray together and take it. Father, how good are you? You've promised and you've made good on all of your promises. And these are 3 incredible ones, 3 unbreakable ones, and all your promises are unbreakable. Because of who you are, because of what you've done. We can have confidence in this. And so, Lord, in life, I know there are a lot of people experiencing a lot of painful things in life right now, and they just kind of crowd out and overshadow you and your word and your truth. And I pray in this moment, you would remind us and bring us back to what we know is true. And we would rest in you and have confidence. Jesus, thank you for your love for me, and I love you. And I pray this in your great name. Amen. As you're ready, take this and thank Jesus for his promises.